Good morning, and welcome to Dondero, Model United Nations debate of the Bay of Pigs invasion. My name is Jessie Knapp, and I will be the moderator for today's debate, in which you will see 5 Model UN members taking on the roles of parties significant to the issue. Daniel Casey will be representing the United States of America. Erica Bell will be representing Cuba. Andrew Jacobs will be representing the Free Cubans. Emily Gandolfi will be representing the USSR, and Rachel Sherrick will be representing the Organization of American States. During today's program, you will have the opportunity to hear from each representative on their position in the issue. Each debater will also have the chance to respond to the comments and policies of the other parties. In addition, members of the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions to individual representatives. The issue is a passionate one for all involved. The Bay of Pigs invasion sparked debate and adjusted relations in a way that would forever influence American foreign policy and international relations. On April 17, 1961, an estimated 1,500 Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs with the intention of invading the Fidel Castro-run communist nation of Cuba. The exiles, based in Florida, had been extensively trained by the United States Central Intelligence Agency throughout the Eisenhower administration and the early months of President Kennedy's term. The United States was integral in planning and funding the operation. The CIA budget for the operation was estimated at $46 million. However, the United States pulled support at the last minute. The Free Cubans continued their attack, unaware of the change of American policy. The exiles hoped to gain support from the Cuban population, but were stopped quickly by Castro's army. Between April 17th and April 19th, about 100 exiles were killed. All others were captured. The failed invasion, embarrassing for the Kennedy administration, had long-lasting repercussions for the United States. The failed invasion helped to strengthen the ties between Communist Cuba and the USSR, who strongly denounced the American involvement in the invasion. Relations between the United States and Cuba became even further strained. Additionally, the actions of the United States angered many members of the international community, particularly the Organization of American States, who were upset the American states failed to bring their concerns to any international mediating body. The United States and Cuba had officially broken off diplomatic relations in January of 1961. The failed invasion only further increased this rift, while further aligning Cuba with the USSR. The Bay of Pigs invasion sparked conflicts that would lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962, during which the USSR had stationed enough nuclear weapons on Cuba to bring the world closer to nuclear war than ever before. As you watch this following debate, please form a list of questions in your mind. For instance, how did the United States justify their involvement in the invasion? Why would they cease involvement at the last minute? What did the international community have to lose or gain from this invasion? What role will the USSR play? It is our strongest hope that you will leave this debate with all of your questions answered and with a better understanding of the significance and implications of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. We will now have speeches for 3 minutes each.
Speaking on behalf of the United States, I'd like to first publicly apologize to the Free Cubans regarding the brutal slaughter of their people by Castro's communist regime in Cuba only a few days ago. Up until this point over the last few years, the United States and Soviets have been in a state of progressing agitation towards basically what you could almost call what looks like it could have been an international war, another world war. The Free Cuba Party, which was a group of freedom-cherishing activists, required the United States' assistance in taking back their homeland. We gave them food, we gave them assistance, we gave them the capability to do so. What we couldn't do, however, was bring the United States into the point where we would have risked a world war. Yes, it failed, but I think that we need to take another look at the way that things were developing in this situation. Communism as a power is growing worldwide, and Cuba is located only 90 miles off the coast of the United States. It won't be long before the communists are placing nuclear weapons and all kinds of crazy weaponry only 90 miles off the coast. which puts the communists in a position where they could easily take out Florida and several other southern states. Because you have to look at it as though the communists, now in power in Cuba, have the capability to cause an incredible amount of destruction. And basically, what the United States did here is we gave Cubans who were seeking their own independence the capability to take back their country. What we couldn't do was get involved and start another world war. However, we need to remind everybody of the situation at hand. There is a war developing, and the only reason that we're not at war right now is because the United States backed down. Thank you.
Cuba was wronged. The United States tried to take over our country. They tried to attack us and pulled out at the last minute. What we had done, we have just been through a revolution. We're getting our government set. We're trying to build stability and legitimacy. Yes, we may have done a few things that may have angered people, but what we need to do is make our own country. We need to have countries around the world recognize us now as a country. What the United States tried to do was pick our type of government. That's not up to them. It's our sovereign right as a nation to have any type of government that we choose. Just because that we don't side with the United States does not mean that they have any right to come in, invade our country, and attack us. And they didn't even finish. What we need to look at right now is that Cuba was wronged. We had people try to attack us, which was completely out of bounds and not right. We need to look how we can solve this and get people to respect our country and our sovereign rights as a nation. Thank you.
I'm representing Free Cuba. One thing I would like to say is that we really were seeking help in our situation when we looked to the United States. And we are deeply saddened that the United States has chosen to follow through on its responsibilities to us as Free Cubans that we were guaranteed. We need more support than is being provided. Obviously, we can't fully trust the United States. We need nations and organizations such as the OAS to help us out in our situation. One of the problems with communism is that we're under an oppressive leader. What happened with the Bay of Pigs invasion is that because the United States dropped the ball, the invasion was lost, and the Free Cuban exiles were either killed or arrested. This happens in communism. That's what makes communism such a power that it is. That people who have differing ideas from the government are snuffed out. And so this is why we need more support for the Free Cubans. Further, Russia aligns itself with Cuba, which makes me wonder about the United States and where they fall in this. The United States developed the Cold War with Russia because they wanted to combat communism, and I'm wondering why the United States decided that it wanted to fight Russia as far as communism, but not give support to people in Cuba who wanted to fight communism. I don't understand what's happening with that. Maybe you could clarify a little bit more. Public apology for the Free Cubans, that's not going to work. That's not going to bring back lives, and that's not going to bring back the support and the time that we invested. Cuba came up here and said that we should recognize the legitimacy and the fact that they're trying to form a stable government with a dictator that doesn't listen to any of the people. That's not at all stable. So I encourage other nations to help out the Free Cubans. We're just looking for a voice in government. Thank you.
Good morning, comrades. I'm the representative from the USSR who will be speaking to you today, and I'd like to speak to you about a couple very important things. Number one, choice. The United States made a choice in 1776 when it chose to fight Great Britain and win democracy for itself and become its own country. Since then, it has made many choices, some wrong, some right. But they've always had the opportunity to make their own decisions. They fought for freedom from an oppressive country. Cuba also has choices to make. They've made the natural correct choice of communism for their government. And they should not be influenced by other countries simply because those countries are in the same hemisphere and sorely fear the government of communism unjustly. Continuing on my other point, that the United States was completely wrong in its attack on Cuba. It had no right in doing it. It was completely unjustified. And the fact that they used Cuban exiles to do it is all the more pathetic. It is against sovereignty to attack another country, and it was an unreasonable action. The United States has had a General Maxwell Taylor submit a report to the U.S. On limited war programs, and his conclusion was that there is no long-term living with Castro as a neighbor, and that Cuban subversion constitutes a real menace to Latin American nations. Is that an excuse? Absolutely not. Also, on the international scale, the United Nations was not really brought into the Bay of Pigs affair. The United States basically went through and acted of its own accord, and was completely unjustified in doing so. The power was taken from the OAS, and what can the Organization of American States do if a charter member does not comply with any demands? In conclusion, the United States was wrong in its actions, and the international community must not allow this to occur again. Thank you.
In America's involvement in the Bay of Pigs crisis, a great injustice has occurred. In the first place, America seriously violated international sovereignty in invading a sovereign nation. Furthermore, they chose to act without the consent or involvement of the international community, namely the Organization of American States. America failed to live up to their obligations to the international community. They're a member of several international bodies, including the OAS and the United Nations. Their failure to bring concerns to the OAS was a slap in the face of mediation, compromise, and international cooperation. This seriously undermines the legitimacy of the OAS and makes our job all the more difficult. The OAS should have been involved in this issue. The OAS's prime responsibility is to mediate issues that happen within North and South America. That's what we're here for, and that's what the United States supports when they join the OAS. However, the failed invasion has sparked chaos, division, and political fighting throughout North and South America. This places the OAS in a very difficult situation. Furthermore, we don't see this situation being remedied anytime soon, and we would hope for a complete apology to both the international community, namely the OAS, and to Cuba, who was wrongly invaded by the American states.
First of all, to reply to what Russia says, comparing Cuba's current situation to the United States independence is a very bad comparison. First of all, the United States Declaration of Independence was a unanimous vote by people represented from all of the states at the time. Excuse me. However, Castro, if I'm not correct, was a minority party in Cuba until he took power. Hence the word tyrant. Now, menace to the Latin American countries. Yes, Cuba, as it stands, is a menace to the Latin American countries. Cuba has basically become another arm of the Soviet power that's spreading across the world. Up until now, communism was across the world from all of these Latin American countries, and now they're sitting right on their doorstep. Yes, this is a very tense situation, and I would even say that Cuba right now is looking a little bit menacing. Next, I've got several dates here that shows the Russians pulling Cuba's dependence away from the United States towards their own views, such as taking away 85% of the sugar trade. That's, 85% of the exports, which is a very large part of the economy. Russia was basically pulling Cuba away from its dependence on the United States, hence the word puppet. This is a very big problem here. I don't think this is an equal representation of all the people, and I think that if you look at the situation clearly, you'll see that a lot of this is not true. Thank you.
Just to basically reiterate on some of the points that have been stated, that the United States is at fault here. They did attack a sovereign nation, Cuba, with no reason. Well, I'm sure they had a reason, but they are trying to choose our government, and now they're trying to choose who we export to. I think what we need to do is have the United States stay out and have us make our own decisions. He talks about us being a USSR puppet. We don't want to be a United States puppet or anybody's puppet. Thank you.
Just a couple points real quick. Earlier, USSR stated in her speech that communism is the correct and right way to go. That leads me to a question that why aren't more nations in the world communist? Because it presents a problem for the people because they're not fairly represented. We can sit here and we can establish what the United States did wrong, and that's fine, but we need to see what we're going to do about the free Cubans who are being oppressed in Cuba. That's more important, and that's why this has started. United States said that Castro was a minority that took over and that the situation in Cuba is menacing. I really apologize for our menacing situation in Cuba. You know, we're trying, but we have a leader who doesn't listen to us, and so we need to act, or we can just acknowledge the fact that communism is a force that we aren't able to deal with and let it spread and let the hundreds and thousands of Cuban people who want a free voice in government to go unnoticed and let a minority rule our government. We need help. We need help from any nation who wants to get rid of communism and wants to help people who need a voice in government. Thank you.
Well, there have been some interesting statements brought up in the last few rebuttal speeches, and I'd like to rebut a few of them on my own. The U.S. has chosen to, again, ignore their actions in the Bay of Pigs. If you've noticed, they haven't really spoken on them too much in their rebuttal because they really seem to want to avoid them. The international community knows, the world knows, that these actions were inappropriate, and the United States knows that as well. I would be curious in the closing speech of the United States to hear some more about the Bay of Pigs as opposed to how communism is spreading. Another point that the United States brought up was that the USSR was trying to lead Cuba away from dependence on the U.S. to dependence on the USSR, which is not true. The USSR is trying to assist Cuba in becoming independent, as in not dependent on the United States. And the United States, for some odd reason or another, feels that Cuba should be dependent on them. I would like to hear him respond to that as well. As the OAS delegate stated earlier, the United States has violated sovereignty without the consent of the U.S. They have failed to live up to their international expectations, and they have truly given a slap in the face to mediation. I would hope that the United States delegate would realize that this was an inappropriate action and that they would take some measures in the future to ensure that it never happens again.
The OAS sympathizes with the United States in their desire to promote freedom throughout the world. However, we were very concerned with the fact that the United States failed to communicate well with the free Cubans, allowing them to go into Cuba and form this attack without the support of the United States that they thought they would have. This is why 100 people died. This is why 1,000 people were captured. Obviously, what happened here was that there was miscommunication and there was failure to mediate and cooperate with two different parties that were involved in the same action. This just proves our point that the United Nations and the OAS need to be involved in issues of international security. That's their entire purpose. And acting so covertly and without the consent or the mediation of any international organization, lives were lost and people were captured, and that's what we need to concentrate on. That's why the United States failed so greatly.
We will now take questions and answers from the audience. If you could just raise your hand and address one of the people up here. Thank you.
I have a question for the representative of Cuba. You expressed some anger towards the United States, saying that they are unfairly choosing your government for you. Isn't that kind of what you're doing to the anti-communist members of Cuba, choosing their government for them, not giving them a voice?
We just had a revolution. We have a new government now. We're trying to build legitimacy and stability within our government. What we are doing is we got rid of a bad leader. We are trying again. And you must realize that the United States did support our decision to have Castro in power. until he did not want to be a U.S. puppet anymore. And now there's a problem.
I don't think you answered my question. Are you giving the members of your society a voice? Are you letting them vote on the way? Are you letting them vote the way they want to vote, or are you just telling them what to do?
Well, we're going through some economic problems right now. We haven't really held a major vote.
So the answer is no.
Well, right now.
Thank you.
All right, I have a question for the Free Cubans. What kind of compensation are the Free Cubans looking for, since things like public apologies aren't acceptable? And
There's not really any compensation that could be given to compensate for lost lives, but we would like to at least make sure that the Free Cubans in the future are ensured a voice in some kind of government, in some kind of democratic form, whether that's through international mediation or other measures. It doesn't matter. We just want to have a voice.
I have a question for the United States. In your speech, you talked about Cuba being a puppet of the East. Wasn't the United States the country that helped put Castro in power in the first place?
I'm not exactly sure what this question would entail. I don't see how another country could put Castro in place, but
May I rephrase it?
I think that if you're asking about funding campaign programs, yes, and other forms, but I don't see how that's exactly relevant. Yes, Castro succeeded another member. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to look it up in my packet. But yes, the United States did contribute certain support towards his campaign, but I'm not going to say that we put him in power, no.
May I ask another question? The person who Castro followed was Batista. To the best of my recollection, I believe the United States helped put him in power also, to then help kick him out with Castro.
Well, when China donates campaign funds to the United States' free elections, nobody has a problem with this. But when the United States donates funds to Cuban free elections, people start having problems. Yes, we helped with elections. I don't see.
I have a question, if I could, for the Organization of American States. If I could ask you to respond to the U.S. delegates' comments about funding for elections, which I believe is a nice euphemism for a CIA operation. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Could you please clarify your question just a little bit?
Yes. I'm concerned, as far as the Organization of American States is concerned, what was the U.S. involvement in Cuba? How did Castro come to power as far as the OAS sees it?
Basically, what we see happening in Cuba is that the United States felt that their interests were not being protected by the government that was in control, so they decided they were going to do something about it, and they were going to try to get another government in control. What happens? They don't like that government either, so they take steps on their own without the help of anyone else or the consent of anyone else to just do as they please in Cuba to find the deal that best fits them. That's basically how we see it.
If the United States attempts to fund an attack on Cuba, what would the reaction of the Soviet Union be?
The Soviet Union would be aghast that the United States would have the nerve to try that again, but we would hope to bring in the international community, but if necessary, I suppose that the USSR would be willing to come to the Cubans' aid if it was deemed a necessary situation. If the United States was truly trying to crush the Cuban government, as we are trying to make them independent.
I guess my follow-up to that is then, is the Soviet Union going to seek to supply the Cubans with military aid from this point on?
Not at this point, no. But if there was any situation which merited it, possibly.
Thank you.
I have a question for the U.S. I'm kind of confused at why the U.S. would pull out at the last minute after supplying goods to this country for so long and then just decide they're done with that.
That's a good question, and it actually goes along with a lot of the rhetoric that I'm hearing up here. What we need to acknowledge is the fact that there was a state of increasing tension in the international community. We were taking steps towards a war. The Soviets threw a punch, the United States threw a punch, the Russians threw a punch. Okay, we put our weapons here, you put our weapons here, you put your weapons here, 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 here. The Soviets were going to keep pushing this until it became a war. And now everybody is blaming us, the United States, because we pulled out of an attack at the last minute and prevented the international community from jumping straight into another world war. I don't see why there's so much anti-U.S. going on around here when we could be throwing nukes at each other right now instead of talking about this in a forum. Yet the United States is the one that's the big brother. The United States is the one planning, spies in Cuba and rigging up the economy. When it's obvious here, Russia owns 85% of Cuba's sugar exports. That's the biggest part of their community. And all of a sudden the United States is the one that's turning Cuba into a pawn? I don't see any of this. I don't see any of this anywhere. Okay, we stop a war. We take a hands-off policy. Okay, we're letting communists sit right on our doorstep. And we're the big brother. We're the bad guy. This is communist rhetoric, and I don't believe in it.
My question is for the OAS. In your opening statement, you seem to condemn the U.S.'s actions, and then in your rebuttal, you seem to support them somewhat. My question is, would the OAS have supported the U.S.'s actions against Cuba if there had been dialogue between the two organizations?
There's really no way to say for sure. The Organization of American States is not one government or one organization. It's a combination of many different countries that exist within the North and South Americas. Therefore, it would be the opinions of all of those nations that mattered, and through debate, I suppose would be the only way that we would know the answer to that question.
Thank you. I have a question for the Cubans, then, if I would. We keep hearing about sugar exports, and we keep hearing about, from you, the economy, attempting to put the economy back together. Let's talk a little bit about two issues, if I could, and you choose the one you want to talk about. First, we've heard the U.S. say that the sugar exports have been taken from them and are now sold to the Soviet Union. And there's also an issue that hasn't been brought up about Cuba's nationalization of U.S. business. Both of these have been cited by the U.S. as important. Could you respond, why is it that you have changed your economic policies this way and nationalized U.S. and United Kingdom businesses?
So you just want me to speak about national?
Sure, if you would.
What Cuba did was completely within the bounds of international law. In order to build our economy and regain money for it, we nationalized instead of doing privatization, which is what the United States does. What we did was there are businesses in Cuba that are United States and United Kingdom owned. We took over them and took the money from them. It is completely within the bounds of the law. It is up to us to decide when and how much we pay each country back. We have not gotten around to it yet. We are going to pay them back the second that our country is stable and we can function properly with legitimacy and stability working with us at the same time. I hope that answers your question.
I have a question for the USSR. You stated that you feel it is wrong for another country to influence others on their policy and their government, but and you said that you believe they needed free will. Each country needed their own free will. What about the free will of those free Cubans, those that feel government isn't working the way they want, and how are they supposed to change that?
Well, as the Cuban delegate has stated, they've just finished going through a revolution. They've been through this massive crisis in their country, and they're trying to stabilize the country before any action is taken. Sometimes this is needed. I'm sure there are other examples in history where this has happened, where sometimes the people need to follow the government for some period of time until the government has regained its stability. And I'm sure that the Cuban government would be willing to listen to those people as soon as the stability has been deemed at an acceptable level for that to happen. Thank you.
I have a question for Cuba. How do you plan on stabilizing your economy and your country after everything's died down?
The same way that any country in distress stabilizes itself. What we do is we are going to start work programs. Can you not hear me? Okay. And get people working, get money flowing into the country, export, doing things just to get the country moving, like the United States did during the Depression, where the government helped the people. They gave them jobs and such to work through it. This may take a while, but we're sure that we will come out on top.
So I have one more.
Okay.
So you're planning on giving the people jobs while you shut down all the factories in your country? Because they're...
We didn't shut the factories down in our country. I'm sorry if I was confusing when I said it. The businesses were owned by the United States and the United Kingdom, and we own them now, which is, they're still running. And
At this time, we will now have closing statements from the speakers.
I love Cuba's last statements as they're up here. They're going to go about fixing their economy in the way that any distressed country would, by calling in the Soviets and allowing them to take over their economy, and then the Soviets will in turn give all the people jobs building nuclear weapons so that they can point them at the United States, just as we've seen. Or will see, I'm sorry. It hasn't happened yet. The Free Cubans, to speak on their behalf, they were called exiles, and I'm going to say now that at the time, I'm sorry, the Free Cubans have a sovereign claim. They've been kicked out of their home by a tyrant who came out of a minority party and took over an entire country. They had a domestic claim, and we felt that it was appropriate to assist them in taking back their homes. These were people who had families, who had lives, who went to work and came home every day just like you did. And to say that it was awful to help these people or to support an invasion, it wasn't an invasion. It was a domestic claim. It was people trying to take back their homes. Okay. As for the United States pulling out, I've already explained this. The United States wanted to avoid a full-scale war. So, at the last moment, thank you to President Kennedy, we removed our presence from the attacks. However, the attacks still went on. We still gave them the support. We still gave them the weapons. We did the best we could. But we could not allow a war to break out. So I apologize to Free Cuba for whatever damages they may have suffered, and we do hope that this won't happen again. The United States did learn a lesson here, despite what Russia says, and we would like to say openly that we are aware of the increasing communist presence only 90 miles off of our border, and should the circumstances arise once more where there's a standoff between the communists and the United States will not back down.
I think that we've pretty much heard what we need to hear. We've heard what the United States has done. We've heard what needs to be done in the future. We've heard things that Cuba may have done that some people may disagree with, may think is wrong, but what we are trying to do is build our country up. Our people are living in extreme poverty. We need to help them. That is what we're doing. We are looking for the best interest of our people. We refuse to be puppets to the Soviets or the United States. We are our own country with our own sovereign rights as a country. They need to be respected by all nations and organizations, and I think that that has pretty much been stated here. Thank you.
I'm really glad that the United States was able to gain a positive learning experience from having Cuban exiles, murdered and imprisoned. That really makes me feel good about the situation and that they won't let it occur again. This is the problem. If international mediation is the answer, then let's go that route. We're just looking for a voice. The United States said that there was increasing tension within the region. Well, then why did you get involved in the first place? Why would you get so close to an invasion and then pull out with a group of exiles who aren't even represented in the government, who are such a slim minority but still need to have a voice? Furthermore, the Cuban economy. Cuba comes up here and says that she wants to establish, Cuba and have it become legitimate. How are you supposed to do that when your economy is so dependent on who you're exporting sugar to? It could be any country. It could be Canada. It could be U.S. It could be USSR. It could be anybody. Whoever they're exporting that 85% of the sugar to, they're going to have the power over Cuba. It looks like a bad situation to me that needs to be remedied. And part of the problem is communism. And if it's on the doorstep, as the United States is saying and claiming throughout their whole speech, why shouldn't we do something to stop it? We should. And they said they're going to combat it next time. Well, why not this time? I don't understand. The best interest of the people is also stated by Cuba. How is communism in any way the best interest of the people if the free Cubans aren't being represented? It's not. The best interest of the people is not being represented, and that's why we have a problem. Thank you.
Comrades, the United States has come before you in their closing speech and made themselves to be a martyr. They say they do not understand why all the other countries in the world are looking at them like they've done something wrong in the Bay of Pigs. Obviously, more than just myself, other delegates here have proven that's incorrect. The United States also finds it most entertaining to joke about nuclear weapons, that USSR will be sending people in to build nuclear weapons in Cuba. But may I remind them that they were the first country to use the atomic bomb in the world. The United States said Cuba should be dependent on themselves, on the United States. So I find it very interesting, the idea that they would like the country to be independent of the USSR, being that they aren't even dependent on us in the first place. As regarding the Cuban economy, I would like to bring up another point that wasn't brought up. August 28, 1960, the United States placed a trade embargo on Cuba. So obviously Cuba could not continue trading with the United States. If they can trade with the USSR and they're working to stabilize their economy, of course they're going to trade with the USSR. It makes sense. Another point I'd like to bring up is that the Cuban government was placed the Cuban government was placed by the United States, and the United States didn't like it in the case of Batista. So the United States removed it, and they brought in Castro. They discover they don't really like Castro, so they try and remove him with the CIA program Covert Actions. They created 8 assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, including one of poisoning his cigars. The U.S. chooses, and is stated in their closing speech, that they choose to go to war, basically, not to use the OAS or the United Nations, and that's their choice. Because, as I've stated earlier, freedom of choice is very important in an international community. But the USSR would like to state its aim as helping Cuba and any other countries develop stability and independence, and instead of using the road to war, to use international mediation. Thank you.
The United States, in all of his speeches, seems very proud of the fact that he pulled out at the last minute before war could happen. He says he prevented war. He decreased an increasing tension situation. Why didn't he do it 2 days before the attack happened? Why didn't he do it a week before the attack happened? Why did they wait until the night before? Why didn't they tell the Free Cubans that that's what they were doing? The Free Cubans went in on this attack without knowing that the United States were not fully supportive of what they were doing. That's why 1,500 Free Cubans were lost. There was no communication, there was no mediation, there was no cooperation. This only proves our point that international bodies such as the OAS and the United Nations are necessary to prevent this miscommunication from happening. Unfortunately, learning that came at a very high price for the Free Cubans.
Well, I hope our audience has learned a lot today. We'd like to thank Mr. Snyder's class for joining us in the studio this afternoon, and to the members of Model UN who gave their speeches. Thank you.